Hi friends, welcome to today's video. My name is Stephanie and today I'm super excited to be showing you two collections from a new to me brand called Prism Parade. Jill was super kind enough to send over the Digital Dystopia collection and the Golden Age Glam collection, which are the two most recent releases from them. So as always, I will save more of my thoughts for the end after the many comparisons that I have. For now, let's just get into the swatches. So starting with the Digital Dystopia collection, the first polish we have here is Urban Wasteland, and it's described as a turquoise base with a pinkish red shimmer and silver and teal holographic glitters. As you can see, the formula on this one was a bit sheer on the first coat, which I do normally expect with shimmers, so while I do also expect some visible nail line with two coats, I didn't find that this one was super self-leveling, so it just looked a little more patchy than I was expecting it to. It might not be as noticeable on camera, but I could just see some lighter spots or unevenness in real life. So I did end up doing a third coat, which I definitely would recommend because not only does it even everything out, it also just deepens the color even more, which I think is super gorgeous. I also really liked how the shimmer shifted in this one. The next polish we have is Neuromancer, and this one is described as having a gray base with a pink shimmer, which gives the polish a dusty purple sort of look. The formula on this one I would say is more on the jelly side, maybe even a little bit more than the last polish for some reason. It just felt more fluid to apply, and I found that it self-leveled a bit better as well. It still was pretty sheer though, where you can still see a lot of my nail line on the first coat, so I was a bit nervous, but doing the second coat actually evened it out a lot more than I was expecting it to, maybe because the base is just a bit on the darker side and there's also just a ton of shimmer which helps distract from any visible nail line. Next we have Ghost in the Machine, which is the magnetic from the collection. This one I would describe as having a dark jelly base with a multi-chrome magnetic pigment that shifts from pink to copper to gold and green in extreme angles. The formula on this one was pretty similar to the last polish, where it leaned a little bit more on the jelly side, but it was very pigmented on the first coat, especially for being such a dark base color. It was easily opaque for me in two coats alone. This obviously magnetized super beautifully. As you can see, there's just a nice crisp cat eye and it has a really beautiful shift in more extreme lighting. And of course, you know I have to show this unmagnetized on the left and with the horseshoe magnet velvetized on the right, which looks so plush. Then we have the topper of the collection, which is called Cybernetic, and this one has silver holographic shard-like flakies. These are some of the largest flaky shards that I have seen in a flaky topper, so I didn't want to layer them over the rest of the collection because I feel like it was just going to be too busy. I personally like the look of this more over a more plain base, like a sheer pink, a white or black, or any solid color. It's a cool flaky topper, just a little bit base heavy. The next polish we have is Electric Horizon, which is described as having a bright blue base with a super glowy green shimmer. So unsurprisingly, this was my favorite from the collection. I absolutely love how glowy this shade is. This also had a really smooth, buttery formula that was very even to apply. It just is a bit sheer on the first coat as expected, again with some shimmers, but it definitely was still decently pigmented, I would say, where it looks good enough for me on two coats. I think if you look very close enough, you might see some visible nail line, but it just wasn't enough for me to do a third. I also love that the shimmer in this shifts to this subtle, like teal, aqua kind of color, so it goes from green to blue basically. It is gorgeous. Next up we have Android Dreams, and this is described as a semi-sheer white lacquer filled with extreme blue shimmer and a touch of tiny holographic glitter. This one had a very similar formula to the last polish, where it just was very even, very easy to apply, just very sheer, especially for being a white kind of jelly polish. So even on 3 coats, you are still going to see a considerable amount of nail line. So if that's not your thing, I would highly recommend using a blurring base coat or maybe layering this over a white. I personally do love how ethereal and glowy it is, though I couldn't really see the holo. Next, we have another easy favorite from the collection. This is Neon Arcade, which is a hot pink filled with a supercharged blue aurora shimmer. You guys know I am such a fan of any kind of pink with a blue shimmer. Though I normally do go for the lighter pinks, I also really love a bright hot pink like this. And this one was super gorgeous. It had a similar formula to the last couple of shades where it was just super easy to apply, very even coverage for the most part, just more on the sheer side, or at least a little bit more sheer than I was expecting. I was sort of expecting fuller coverage on 2 coats, but I found I needed a third to kind of get the look I was going for, but you still are going to see some nail line. And rounding out the Digital Dystopia collection is Lucid Scream, which is described as having a violet base with dual blue shimmer pigments. So it sounds like there are 2 different blue shimmers in here, which I think adds a little bit of extra depth maybe, though it is kind of hard to tell the blue shimmers apart. Either way, they definitely still glow against the purple base. The formula on this one, I would say, was pretty similar to the last couple of shades, where again it applies really nicely. It's just more on the sheer side, so even after doing 2 coats, I feel like you can still see some nail line. It's not as noticeable in this clip, but you'll see it in a second in the skittle portion. So here is the first half of the collection worn as a skittle. I have the magnetic worn as a velvet nail on my ring finger and as the cat eye effect on my thumb. I'm wearing 2 coats of each except for the topper on my pinky, which is just 1 coat over a base coat. And yeah, I would say that overall these looked really great even in direct sunlight. I would just maybe go in with a 3rd coat for Urban Wasteland on my pointer finger, just because it can be a little sheer, so it just depends on how intense you want that deep teal color to be. And here's the second half of the collection worn as a skittle, again in 2 coats each. Obviously, the white polish is going to have the most visible nail line, so even if you do a 3rd coat, you're still going to see that. But the other polishes looked great, maybe with the exception of Lucid Scream on my thumb, where again, you can see more nail line, but you don't really see it on my pinky. So depending on, you know, the size and shape and length of your nails, you might just need a 3rd coat. It was also most noticeable in direct sunlight. So moving on to the Golden Age Glam collection, the first polish we have here is Lena, inspired by Lena Horne, who was a Black actress, singer, and civil rights activist. This one has a shifty green shimmer in a navy base, which might be kind of hard to see because the shimmer is so strong, but it definitely has this like dusty, muted sort of blue color underneath all of it. I wasn't super impressed with how it looked on the first coat just because it looked a bit uneven, but I found that it evened out so beautifully on the second coat, and the green shimmer is just gorgeous. I think it stands out enough as it is, but you could do a 3rd coat to intensify it more. The next shade is Rita, which is inspired by the Puerto Rican actress Rita Moreno, who was one of old Hollywood's greatest living legends. This one is described as a ruby red filled with large particle shimmers that shift from red to gold. This was another beautiful shade. The formula was okay, where it did apply a little bit easier than the last shade, but it still was a little bit uneven. I do think I evened it out enough on the second coat here. There is still like a hint of visible nail line, but it just wasn't enough for me to do a 3rd. And yeah, I just love a good sparkly red, and this one is beautiful. And here's some adjusted lighting to try to show off that gold shift, but it's a little subtle on camera. Next up we have Hudson, which was inspired by Rock Hudson, one of the golden age of Hollywood's leading men, which is described as a dark blue lacquer filled with glowy blue shimmer and a gold reflective glitter. So as you can see, I kind of struggled with the application on this one. I maybe just grabbed a little too much on the brush, which resulted in me just overworking the polish and just kind of pulling up some of that polish from the first coat. So, just be careful with your application. I kind of floated the brush a little bit here on the second coat, which gave me much better even coverage, and it looked fully opaque for me. I was honestly kind of surprised because it looked a little bit on the jelly side, but this was the most full coverage out of everything I tried so far. Next we have Liz, which is inspired by the actress, man-eater, and most notably queer ally, Elizabeth Taylor. This is a violet base filled with fine particle pink shimmer, black reflective glitter, and microfine holographic glitter. The formula on this one, as you can see, was very sheer, a lot more than I was expecting. I thought it was gonna have a more almost metallic kind of finish, just looking at it in the bottle, but I would say this is definitely more in line with your sheer kind of shimmery finishes. It does build up nicely in 2 coats, but I definitely think you could do a third if you want to intensify the color. The shimmer does stand out beautifully, and the holographic sparkle does as well. The black reflective glitter just kind of looks like little black specks. Next we have Audrey, inspired by none other than Hollywood darling and fashion icon Audrey Hepburn. This is a metallic platinum flake with a microfine holographic glitter. So this definitely is a very full coverage type of flaky formula. Personally, way too dense in my opinion to be a topper, but you do you. I just built this up in 2 coats and it was fully opaque in just 2 coats alone, which I thought was really impressive. It didn't feel thick at all. The flakies all laid flat and smooth, and it was just really easy to apply, and I just love that super foily mirror-like shine. And last but certainly not least, we have Marilyn, inspired by the iconic bombshell Marilyn Monroe. This one is simply described as a super hot shimmery magenta lacquer, and it is so gorgeous, even if it is very simple in its finish. This one also had an incredible formula, probably one of the best ones, at least of the shimmery shades from this collection, where it was very pigmented but very even on the first coat, just still a bit sheer where, if you are looking close enough, you can still see a hint of nail line. But I personally think that the base is dark enough and the shimmer is glowy enough that it just kind of distracts from that, so I didn't bother with a third coat. I also love that the shimmer in this shifted to red in extreme angles. And here is the Golden Age Glam collection worn as a skittle in 2 coats each. I'm wearing both Rita and Marilyn on my thumb. I have Rita on the left and Marilyn on the right. I feel like they look more similar on camera than they are in real life, but you can definitely tell that one is red and the other is hot pink. But yeah, overall, I thought this was a beautiful collection. The shimmers are gorgeous. They look great in just 2 coats alone, but I think I would recommend doing a third just to intensify the colors on some of them a little bit more. Now, getting into comparisons, we're starting with the Digital Dystopia collection with Urban Wasteland, and this immediately reminded me of Mooncat's Am I Everything You Fear, which looks like it could be a dupe in the bottle, but on the nail there definitely is a difference. Urban Wasteland is just a little bit more green leaning, and the shimmer stands out more in Mooncat. Then for Neuromancer, I was reminded of Holo Taco's Camera Shy, but that one is obviously a much lighter shade of gray with a bit more of a purple undertone, and the shimmer is also pink, so definitely not a dupe. The closer shade in my collection is Mooncat's Nightcrawler, which again I would say looks more similar in the bottle than it does on the nail, because on the nail Mooncat is a lot darker, a lot more pigmented, where it almost swallows up the shimmer while it stands out more in Prism Parade. So I was wearing 2 coats of each, but I decided to do a third coat of Neuromancer, which definitely makes it match a little bit closer. They're not exact dupes, but the shimmer even shifts to that same kind of pink color, so I feel like it could be close enough. Then for Ghost in the Machine, I was immediately reminded of Mooncat's Black Flame Candle from the Hocus Pocus 2 collection a couple of years ago. That obviously has these extra iridescent flakies, but I feel like the base color and the magnetic pigment were very close. Black Flame Candle is described as having like a black base, but it kind of looks like a very dark burgundy. I would say that the magnetic shimmer isn't an exact dupe either, but it's like very close. The shimmer just looks a little bit lighter in color in Mooncat, so if you happen to miss out on it and you have Holo Taco's Cosmic Unicorn skin, you might be able to recreate it with this Prism shade. Then for Cybernetic, I wanted to show this next to Mooncat's Hall of Mirrors from their recent Baroque collection. That one isn't holographic, but it does have these like larger flaky pieces. For a more standard flaky scattered holo topper, I have this oldie from Bluebird in my collection, which as you can tell is just a lot smaller and more finely milled compared to the larger shards of Cybernetic. Then for Electric Horizon, I figured I could show this next to Mooncat's Mercury's Tears, which is a bright cobalt blue, but that has more of a pink shimmer head on. I definitely was more reminded of Live Love Polish's Confetti Dreams, which is one of my favorite shades that I'm hoping Mooncat will bring back one day, but I feel like this is another case where they look pretty similar in the bottle, but you can definitely tell a difference on the nail. Electric Horizon is just a bit more sheer and with a stronger greenish shimmer, so I figured I could maybe show this next to Mooncat's River Styx, which does have a very strong green shimmer, but as you can tell, it's like a lighter aqua kind of base. So I thought another close shade was Cirque's Wipeout, which has this kind of cornflower base color and a similar aqua sort of shimmer color. So it's not green like Electric Horizon or River Styx. So I would say the base color of Cirque is a little bit closer, but that one's just a little bit more of a muted blue maybe. So the shimmer is definitely more similar in Mooncat. So I feel like Electric Horizon is kind of a mix of both of these shades. Then for Android Dreams, I knew I wanted to see this next to Mooncat's Ghost of Hecate, which is another milky white kind of jelly base with a strong blue shimmer. I know that one is really sheer though, so I figured I could also show it next to Head in the Clouds, which has just a more pigmented kind of buildable crully base. The shimmer in that one is a little bit of a lighter shade of blue. It's kind of hard to tell, so I would say that Ghost of Hecate is closer, but not an exact dupe either. I think the shimmer is a little bit lighter and the holo stands out a bit more. So I also wanted to show this next to a couple of other milky whites with blue shimmers like Cirque's Mystic Moonstone and Holo Taco's Swan Song. So between these two shades, I think Android Dreams is a little bit closer to Cirque because they both have these very sheer like jelly bases. Holo Taco's is a little bit more pigmented, slightly more on the crully side, and the shimmer in Holo Taco is just a little bit more subtle compared to the other two. Then for Neon Arcade, I of course had to show this next to Mooncat's Merkitten, which is a hot pink with a bright blue shimmer. And I did also want to show this next to Cirque's Say Chic because I knew that one was more sheer, so I thought it actually might be closer to Neon Arcade. So I am wearing 2 coats of each here, and they all look pretty similar. Maybe the base color of Neon Arcade is like a little bit deeper in color, but I don't know if you would need all three. And rounding out Digital Dystopia with Lucid Scream, I was immediately reminded of Everybody's Scream from Mooncat, but I forgot how much lighter of a purple shade that was. So to get that intense like blue shimmer, I figured I could show this next to House of Hades, which has this indigo base color and it's more of a micro flaky formula. And I figured I could also show this next to Cracked Polish's Wow, which is a little bit more on the purple side, but is more similar in terms of the shimmer finish. So seeing them on the nail, they're not exact dupes by any means. I think you can tell that Cracked is the darkest out of the 3 and Mooncat's was the most sheer out of the 3, but I was still surprised to see how close the shimmer is kind of matched. I was also reminded of a couple of ILNP shades. The first one here is Abracadabra from a previous Halloween collection. That one looks like it's a little too dark though, and then I remembered Last Call from a previous New Year's Eve collection, which that one looked way more similar in the bottle. Like, I thought these were gonna be dupes, but there is a pretty clear difference on the nail where both of the ILNP shades are just a little too dark. Maybe a third coat of Lucid Scream would better match Last Call. Then for Golden Age Glam, we of course are looking at Lena next to Mooncat's Serpents of Eden. I thought these were going to be a lot closer, but that's a little too dark. So then I remembered Alien Invasion, which unfortunately has been retired. And I wouldn't say these are exact dupes, but it's definitely the closest to a dupe that I found for Alien Invasion. Lena definitely has the same exact shimmer. It's just the base color that is a little bit more blue instead of green. Then for Hudson, I knew I wanted to see this next to Cracked Polish's Shut the Front Door, which is another beautiful teal kind of shimmery metallic, but that's a little too light. So I thought a closer shade of blue was Holo Taco's Steep Dreams from the David's Tea collab. That one does have a crushed hollow finish, so it's a little bit more sparkly than Hudson is. I would say the finish is definitely closer to Cracked, being this like shimmery metallic, but the color is definitely closer to Holo Taco. So Hudson's like the in-between of these two. I could have sworn I had something closer, and so I wanted to pull out ILNP's Invite Only. That looked like it was going to be a straight up dupe in the bottle, and maybe they look more similar here on camera, but in real life you can definitely tell a difference where ILNP is a little bit lighter and more sheer, and it's also a little bit more teal leaning in the flakies. Next for Rita, I knew I had to show this next to Mooncat's The Arsonist, which is one of their most gorgeous shimmery reds. That one's a little too fiery, so I knew I also wanted to see this next to Cracked Polish's Crimson Ecstasy, which is one of my favorite reds from Cracked. In the bottle, these look like they could be close, but on the nail, there is a very clear difference where I would say the biggest difference with Rita is just how sheer it is compared to the other two. Again, this is 2 coats of each. So since Rita was a little more sheer, I thought that it would be closer to some ILNP reds, so I wanted to pull out Ruby as well as Penny, which have this larger shimmer particle or like a very small micro flaky kind of finish, and these definitely are a lot more similar than the previous 2 reds, but I still wouldn't call these dupes. Penny is definitely more on the fiery side, so I think color-wise, Rita is actually closer to Ruby. It's just a few shades lighter, or maybe it just needed another coat. Next for Audrey, I wanted to quickly show this next to Holo Taco's Ride or Diamond, which is a really glitzy, more of a true silver kind of color. So I thought the closer shade in my collection was Cirque's Reflector, which again, I think looks like a dupe in the bottle, but on the nail, there is a slight difference. I think this one is a bit more subtle, where the metallic microflakes are just more finely shredded in Cirque's, and maybe it's a little lighter too. Then for Liz, I was actually immediately reminded of Holo Taco's Crystal Mommy, which is a purple crushed hollow. That has more of a stronger pink shimmer though, so to get more of that blue shimmer, I thought I could also show this next to Cracked Polish's Wow, which, you know, seeing them side by side, I was like, okay, maybe these are gonna be closer, but I just forgot how sheer Liz was, so seeing them on the nail, they just do not compare. And lastly for Marilyn, I wanted to see this next to Cracked Polish's Cupid Mist because I thought they had a similar like pink shimmer, but Cracked is just way too dark. So I thought some closer shades were Lurid's You Are the Rock That Refuses and Mooncat's Freshly Bitten, which I thought Mooncat definitely had more of a matching shimmer, but the base color in that is a lot darker, which is most noticeable on the nail. I thought Lurid was going to be a little too light. It kind of still is on the nail, but it's kind of close to Marilyn. I felt like I had something closer, and then I remembered Cirque's Wildberry West, which I would say is the closest to a dupe in my collection. These two definitely have like a very similar berry base color. The shimmer is the most different though, where it's blue in Cirque and more of that purple color in Prism. So that wraps up my swatches and comparisons for Prism Parade's Golden Age Glam and Digital Dystopia collections. As always, I can't wait to hear what you think of these releases because generally I think they were really nice. Prism Parade only has 2 other collections right now on their website, so they are a relatively new indie brand. And while I only reviewed these 2 today, I generally do like their themes and how well curated the collections are. I think if I had to choose between these 2, I would probably go with Digital Dystopia, which maybe isn't surprising, but Golden Age Glam definitely did have some beautiful shades as well. I did want to mention a few other things since you might be new to Prism Parade. The first is that they do have a somewhat smaller bottle size coming in at 11 milliliters. For reference, that's the same size as a Cirque polish, but a little bit smaller than ILNP, Mooncat, and Holo. I thought the rounded paddle brush in these was nice, but I felt like maybe some of them were a little stiff. Like, I know I mentioned it during some of the swatches that I found that they didn't self-level the best, so I just had better application when I was more careful with like floating my brush and doing like very light coats. I'm honestly not sure if that's more of an issue with like the brush just being too dense or something, or the polishes just being too thick maybe. Like, as I'm sure you know, I'm usually pretty heavy-handed and not always the most careful with my application, but I was a little bit extra careful with these. So if you're someone like me who sometimes struggles with painting neatly, you might need a drop or 2 of thinner in these. But again, that is assuming that the issue is with the polishes themselves and not like the brush just holding too much or not enough polish. And one more thing relating to the brush is actually about the cap sizes, where I'm not sure how well you were able to tell during the comparison portion, but the caps are a little bit shorter than the standard cap sizes. This is obviously a Cirque bottle, but the caps in here are also the same size as like KB Shimmer or other like rounded bottles. It is only like a millimeter or 2 of difference, which maybe doesn't sound like a lot. It's not that it made it any more difficult for me to like hold, but I could notice that it was just like a shorter cap. I know that cap sizes or even shapes can just be an issue for some people, so I did want to mention that as well. But aside from that, I thought that these were really nice polishes, even if a lot of the shades or colors themselves weren't especially unique to my collection. Obviously, there were a lot of polishes that just immediately reminded me of Mooncat shades, but as you saw again with the comparisons, they weren't like exact dupes either. Even though they looked like it in the bottles, more often than not, the Prism Parade shades were a little bit lighter or just maybe less pigmented, just more sheer than the other polishes that I was sharing. So if you are interested in trying Prism Parade, I will have their website linked down below. And I do have a couple of friends who have some discount codes with them, so I will include those as well. Definitely let me know if you would love to see any future Prism Parade releases on my channel, or if you'd love to see my own discount code with them, or just let me know any and all thoughts that you have down below so we can chat about it. But thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!